with very little fanfare. I mean, when we submitted the manuscript, they came back to us with positive reviews
quickly,
and really
good
feedback.
excited.
And they're like, this is a great study. And can you just make like one small change to this table here? I mean, they didn't have a whole lot of changes they even wanted us to make after they accepted it.
No, and that's a testament to the whole team. Welcome to the Life After Impact podcast, where we do a deep dive into all things concussion and brain injury related. We talk about all the different symptoms that can follow brain injury, different testing methods, different types of specialists out there, and different therapies available. I'm Sophia Bouwens. I'm here with Dr. Ayla Wolf, and we will be your guide to living your best life after impact.
In this episode of Life After Impact, we are going to talk about our pilot study, which was a research project looking at the use of acupuncture for people suffering from post-traumatic headaches. So, Sophia, why don't you start out by just giving us a little bit of information on the study? And this was, something that was really your baby because you had found the funding for it and you reached out to the right people that started to make this all happen. Give people kind of some background on this.
Oh, I was super excited to dive into this with you and just even bring this to the table. It was not me that found the funding. It was Dr. Amanda Herrmann, the lead on the study. The study is titled Acupuncture Treatment for Chronic Post-Traumatic Headache in Individuals' Mild Traumatic Brain Injury, a pilot study. It was published in the Journal of Neurotrauma online in October 2024. What's really interesting about this study, it was a 2-year pilot study to really just ask a question with this complex condition, post-traumatic headache. The question was really, could we make a change in this diagnosis in this condition? And then from there, we want to ask more questions. How and why and where and which ways can we do it the best?
And I think, too, just to give people a really kind of big bird's eye view, when it comes to medicine and research, we as acupuncturists can collect all kinds of just data and clinical experience, but in order for what we do to really make it into mainstream medicine or to be widely accepted for, say, a specific condition like post-traumatic headaches, you really need the research. You really need to do the research to say, hey, this isn't just my opinion about what's happening in my office, but this is, an actual research study that has an institutional review board and all of these checks and balances to make sure that, we're doing this in a way where we're being objective about our findings. And so the reason why I'm excited about it is because we had good outcomes, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it really opens the door to then say, okay, we did the pilot study, we had good outcomes, so now let's hopefully go out and get more funding to do larger scale studies with hopefully longer durations of treatment, more people, better objective markers that we're gathering throughout. And so it's exciting that this initial study was, really very quickly picked up by the Journal of Neurotrauma.
Which is a big deal.
It's a big deal. Each of these journals that publish scientific research, they have an impact score. And the Journal of Neurotrauma at the time of recording here is 3.9 out of 5. And that's a really high score. And so what that says is that this journal doesn't just take anybody's research. They really highly vet the research for good quality, good methods. They don't just take anything. And so the fact that with very little fanfare, I mean, when we submitted the manuscript, they came back to us with positive reviews
quickly,
and really good feedback.
Excited.
And they're like, this is a great study. And can you just make like one small change to this table here? I mean, they didn't have a whole lot of changes they even wanted us to make after they accepted it.
No, and that's a testament to the whole team, right? Dr. Herrmann, who wrote the manuscript, the people at the institute that did the stats reviewing and putting it all together, the design that we came up with, the treatment that we came up with, how it impacted patients, and what changes we saw in this really stubborn, difficult to treat condition that only 13% of people are satisfied with their outcomes with. We made an impact there. And the Journal of Neurotrauma was excited about how we did it and They want more.
And so referencing, you just referenced the study we had talked about in a previous episode where 87% of people said they were dissatisfied with their current treatments for post-traumatic headache. So with that kind of statistics, that really did allow us to say, okay, if 87% of people are dissatisfied, then let's try this, then let's research these other therapies like acupuncture, because most of the standard of care is medication, right? Mm-hmm. And so if medication's not cutting it, if medication's not helping these people, what other therapies are out there that could potentially give them relief? And so, to be able to have a non-pharmaceutical intervention that, in terms of our outcomes, people were going into the study with approximately or on average 23 headache days per month. And then after the acupuncture, which one group got 5 treatments only, right? So once a week for 5 weeks. And then the other group, acupuncture twice a week for 5 weeks. So we were only looking at an intervention of either 5 treatments or 10 treatments. And part of the difference in those 2 arms was to say, does the frequency matter? And what we ended up finding out was that on average in both groups, they experienced 8 less headache days per month. And if this was a pharmaceutical study and they found a reduction from, 23 headache days per month down to 15, that would be a blockbuster drug, I think, in just that short of, in a 5-week window, that kind of change. And so that's super exciting, because that, I think, opens the door for us to be able to do more research.
Ask more questions, right? So I wonder, too, thinking about dose, because this was a dosing question. But do you think 5 treatments clinically, in your experience, is enough treatments for people to have their post-traumatic headaches resolved?
So the research says that when you get a concussion, on average, people get better within 14 to 30 days. But really, the research is saying about 70 to 85% of people recover in this normal window of recovery. And so my patient population is not the population of people who recover in 14 to 30 days. The people that I see are the people who fall in the other category where they didn't recover in a normal expected window of time. And by the time they see me, their concussion is maybe 6 months to 2 years to 5 years old, and they're suffering with daily headaches, right? And they've been very stubborn, and they've tried this medication and that medication and this therapy and that therapy, and they're still symptomatic. I've been drinking Purity coffee now for over 2 years, and one of the things that I absolutely love about Purity coffee is the fact that they do rigorous testing for mold toxins, pesticides, and heavy metals, which allows me to be able to drink their coffee and rest easy knowing that I am not consuming toxic chemicals, mycotoxins, or possibly heavy metals. I know a lot of our listeners are paying a lot of attention to their health and trying to do everything they can to stay healthy. And if you are a coffee drinker, one of the things that I would recommend is making sure that you're drinking a coffee that isn't putting more toxins into your body. If you would like to try Purity Coffee, you can get 20% off your first order using our promo code LIFEAFTER20 by going to puritycoffee.com and entering that in the promo code box at checkout. And so in the cases that I see, it's very rare that those people have miraculous results within 5 treatments. And usually, we're having to do not just acupuncture, but a lot of other therapies combined. So it's also very hard to say, well, this therapy got them this much better and that therapy got them that much. It's very hard to tease out of all the therapies, right? Which one did what. And for me, the reason why I like to have a very large tool bag is because I'm not attached to any one tool either. Even as an acupuncturist, it's like if somebody doesn't want needles, doesn't want acupuncture, I'm like, great, that's fine. I got a whole tool bag here. We can use all kinds of other fun things here. But to answer your question, in the study, we saw a great improvement in the people who only had 5 treatments. However, when we followed up with them 3 months later, what we saw was that their headaches had gotten worse again after the treatments were stopped or discontinued because the study ended. And so I think what that study showed is that the acupuncture was helping, but because it was stopped after only 5 weeks, we didn't create enough neuroplasticity to create lasting changes with only 5 weeks of care.
I agree. I think of it like exercise again. If you go to the gym once a week for 5 weeks, you're going to be doing better. If you go to the gym once a week or twice a week for 5 weeks, you're going to be doing better as well. But it's not until that 3-month or 4-month period that you might find a bigger difference between the once a week versus twice a week or 3 times a week treatments. And some studies have shown similar effects with things like migraine. You had the case study you mentioned last episode about the patient that was getting treatment. Do you want to touch on that really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, that was such a great case to highlight the importance of frequency and duration. And so that person was having headaches for 35 years, I think, and every single day she was having a migraine and had been diagnosed with medication overuse headaches. Going off of all the medications didn't make the headache go away. And so she started doing acupuncture twice a week for 6 months. And what they found was that after 4 weeks or 8 treatments, she had no change in her headaches. She was still having them every single day. But then by week 12, she was only down to like having 8 headache days a month. And then by the 6 months, she was having maybe 1 day a month where she was having a headache. And so again, most people, if they start a therapy and they do it twice a week for 4 weeks and they don't see a change, I think a lot of people are quitting at that point. And I think that kind of graph in that paper was just so eye-opening to say this was somebody who was having headaches every single day, and 6 months later she was having them once a month.
That's a big deal.
After basically 48 acupuncture treatments. But after, 12 weeks, she had significant relief. And
there's so many components that go into studying things. With this study in particular, we did the high dose of 2 times a week or low dose 1 time a week. And because of our funding and our question window, we didn't have time to ask, how does this do after 12 months? We had to first say, do we make a change? Before we put someone through a 12-week regimen, can we make a difference? And as a pilot study, we could ask that question in a container, and we got to show that, yes, we do. And now, as any pilot study does, it begs more questions and has you do further investigations. So I'm excited to see where we go with it next.
Yeah, I've really found that in the process of doing research, it's a process of learning how to do the research better every single time.
Absolutely.
And I know we've talked about wanting to do more research, but also being able to actually have a better differential in terms of you've got, let's say, 100 people with post-traumatic headaches. Well, if some of those people are having cervicogenic headaches coming from the neck trauma, what would their treatment look like different from the person who's having true migraines, different from the person who's having migraine-like headaches, versus the person who's having a tension headache. And so to be able to actually have more individualized approaches based on what's driving the headache, and also a better diagnostic process of saying, is there an ocular motor dysfunction that's driving this person's headache versus the other person? And so is there something else that is, keeping them in that state that we need to be paying attention to as well, for example?
I remember calling you with this question and trying to figure out the design for this study. I remember how excited I was, but how challenged it was too. It was like, okay, we have one shot to make one treatment type that everyone's going to get the same treatment for this really complex condition, post-traumatic headache, that can come from many different ways. We have to just figure out one protocol to give everyone. What do we do?
Yeah. And that's where I came up with what I felt like was a total shotgun approach of saying, okay, we're going to do some points that I know help to increase blood flow to the anterior circulation of the brain. And we're going to do some points that have a really powerful effect on the brain's ability to inhibit pain in that periaqueductal gray of the mesencephalon. And then we're going to do a few other points to help shift people out of a sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state. And then we're going to do a few points around the eyes and with the trigeminal nerve to try to help modulate this trigeminal cervical complex. And so we did really kind of come up with the shotgun approach to this.
Little bit of everything. Sprinkle some of this, sprinkle some of that, and it made a change.
It worked, yeah.
Which is remarkable, a testament to acupuncture.
Well, and this is where I just love that the Health Partners Neuroscience Center is so open to doing research on non-pharmaceutical options for things like concussion recovery and post-traumatic headaches. And I've just loved that Dr. Herrmann and her whole team are so open to these kinds of therapies and studying them. And then also, I know that there's some research on transcranial magnetic stimulation happening as we speak for people with post-traumatic headaches through the Neuroscience Center as well. And so I just love that they're so open-minded and willing to do that kind of research and to allocate, all of those research, funding and personnel and, the statistics teams and, managing all of that. The fact that they're allocating all of those, people and resources to studying these therapies is so exciting.
I think it is exciting, and it starts to shift the dynamic in medicine, right? Because I think as a whole, Western medicine is starting to understand like medications and surgeries can't be our only options. We have to figure out other things too. The providers I work with at the Neuroscience Center, I'm so grateful for, because from the physicians that refer patients in who really are wanting to find solutions for their patients to the other therapists they get to work alongside to find real solutions for each individual is really key. And research is hard. This was a 2-year pilot study that took 6 years to complete. We did have a pandemic.
There was a pandemic thrown in there that
made a little bit of difference there, but we stuck with it, and we have lots more questions to ask moving forward, which is great. So
yeah, and I think that, the military and the VA hospitals have also, really taken up that mantle too, to say, what can we do that's non-pharmaceutical? Because thanks to the opiate crisis, we know that we can't just be throwing addictive pain medication at people, because that creates way more problems. And so I do think that ever since the opiate crisis and the aftermath of that people are much more open to trying other therapies and recommending other therapies, but it helps doctors and physicians when they actually have a research to say, hey, I have evidence to say that this is worthwhile.
So listeners who are struggling with post-traumatic headache or chronic post-traumatic headache, which is more than just immediately after the injury, but 3 or 6 months more, could go find that study. If they have an acupuncturist that isn't familiar with post-traumatic headache or the neurology of it or working with it, they could bring that study as a starting point, a launch point to say, this made a difference in this group. Can we start here? Or listen to this podcast and our previous episodes, which dive into headache and post-traumatic headache more specifically as well. Maybe fill out our questionnaire that's on our website.
Yeah, that's also a great starting point, because we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, that importance of when you're describing your headache to your healthcare providers, it's really important to be able to do that in clear terms. And there are some people that, they've not taken any healthcare courses, and so they're experiencing symptoms, but they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to describe them. And once you give people the vocabulary, then they can communicate better. And so that's the whole point of this free headache communication tool that's on the lifeafterimpact.com website, is like, here is the tool that you can use if you feel like you don't have the right vocabulary to really dive into describing the different types of head pain, whether that is, migraine-like, or whether it's this neuropathic pain that we did the whole podcast on. And these things are important. These differentiations are important for getting the right kind of therapies.
And there's small uses of language that can make all the difference in your quick interactions with your physicians or providers who are trying to make sure the diagnosis is correct, so the treatment is correct and effective.
Yeah. I mean, I had a patient who would often, when she came in, she would describe swelling in her neck. And I kept kind of being like, okay, this isn't making any sense. I'm palpating your neck. I'm looking at your neck. I'm not seeing any signs of swelling here. And so when I finally said to her, I was like, when I hear the word swelling, I'm typically thinking that there is actual swelling. There's congestion of fluid. I can see this. I can feel this. There might be temperature changes. And I'm like, I'm just not seeing any of this. And what we basically came to find out is that she was using the word swelling to just describe muscle tightness.
Oh.
And so it was a complete miscommunication, because she was using the word swelling to describe muscle tension.
So different.
It's very different. And I have people all the time that say they have vertigo when they don't actually have vertigo. They've just got dizziness. Or I have people that will say they have vertigo or dizziness when really what they have is disequilibrium. And so as people, especially when it comes to brain injuries, it's not fair to the people that have the injury that they have to then go out and feel like they have to get a neuroscience degree just to understand their process, right?
And or even having had one before my injury.
Right, actually having a legit neuroscience degree.
Having one too helps, but it doesn't always get you there.
Yeah. And so, again, another reason why we're doing the podcast and why I wrote the book is to try to really give people the vocabulary they need to understand what's going on without trying to piecemeal it together from Dr. Google.
And I'm hopeful that research like what we did helps the world and patients and providers understand some of the options. And I'm excited to see where we go with it in the future, because it was a pilot study and we do expect to make a bigger study with a better question or maybe different treatments that get at these different types of post-traumatic headaches.
Absolutely. I'm excited for that. We'll put a link to the abstract in the show notes so people can take a look at that. And once again, if this podcast has been helpful to you, feel free to subscribe by clicking the link in our show notes, and you can subscribe at whatever membership level you feel comfortable with. But we appreciate your support. We would love if you would share this podcast if you have other people that you know are suffering from concussions or post-concussion syndrome. And please reach out to us. Let us know if you have questions, topics you want us to cover at lifeafterimpact@gmail.com.
We'd love to hear from you.
Our next episode is going to be on traumatic neck injuries. And I think that one's going to be a part 1, part 2.
Yes, that's going to dive into a lot of the confusion that can come between the neck and the head and how we can dive into that. So stay tuned.
Medical disclaimer. This video or podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and materials included is at the user's own risk. The content of this video or podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and consumers of this information should seek the advice of a medical professional for any and all health-related issues. A link to our full medical disclaimer is available in the notes.